Hi everyone, my name is Abhiraj Garikapati. Welcome to my YouTube channel Amazing Abhi.
Don't just hear the story, enter it.
Out, saying they didn't have much time. As they walked through the bustling streets of Geneva, she told him to stay close. The problem was that people kept staring at them. Geomat became increasingly uncomfortable and suggested maybe they should walk a little farther apart. Abel immediately rejected the idea, explaining that Europe wasn't like Korea. The roads were confusing and it was easy to get lost. Besides, she insisted that people were only looking because his hair color stood out. Geoman knew that wasn't true. Compared to Abel's blessing, his hair was completely irrelevant. The blessing of the snowflower was practically a cheat code. In-game, her beauty alone could inflict hesitation and reduce enemy actions before battles even started. It was crowd control disguised as attractiveness. Thinking back, Abel was literally the reason he had started spending money on the game. Yet somehow, he wasn't affected nearly as much anymore. Maybe he was slowly developing resistance. Before he could think further, Abel announced they had arrived. The restaurant wasn't a sushi place like Geoma had expected. Once seated, Abel ordered her usual meal without even looking at the menu. Geoma commented that she seemed to visit often, and she revealed that she used to come here frequently with her parents when she was young. The moment she mentioned them, her expression darkened slightly. Noticing that immediately, Geoma changed the topic and started examining the menu. He pointed at a dish called raclette and admitted he had never heard of it before. Abel explained that it was a traditional dish where melted cheese was poured over meat and sausages. Since he had wanted local food, she had brought him here specifically. Geoma's thoughts immediately drifted toward kimchi. Abel stared at him for a second before accurately guessing exactly what he was thinking. Geoma was genuinely surprised by how she knew. Right then, the waiter arrived with their food. Looking down at the massive chunk of meat on his plate, Geoma realized he had another problem. Because of his blessing, using knives under 39 centimeters could trigger his blessing. Meanwhile, Abel was busy taking photos of the food. Watching her do something so normal made her seem like an ordinary girl for once, instead of an overpowered game character. When she noticed him staring, she awkwardly apologized for taking pictures. Geoma simply asked whether she liked photography. Abel admitted she had, and revealed recently created an Instagram account before, shyly asking if she should give him hers. Completely oblivious, Geoma asked what exactly she meant. After awkwardly clarifying that she meant her Instagram account, Geoma casually replied that he didn't use social media. Abel visibly deflated. A moment later, Geoma called her name. Her mood instantly recovered, only for him to slide his plate toward her and ask if she could cut the meat for him. Abel froze. The request immediately dragged her into an old memory. Years ago, in this exact restaurant, she had stubbornly insisted on cutting her own food. Her father had gently taken the knife away and explained that members of the Nibelung family weren't allowed to hold knives until age 7. When she complained that Grandpa said he had used knives much younger, both of her parents had burst into laughter. Her father had then taken her plate and cut the food himself. When little Abel complained that she wasn't a child anymore, her mother had explained something she never forgot. Entrusting someone else with your food meant trusting and caring about them. Meals were one of the most important things in life, and letting someone handle yours was a sign of affection. Back in the present, Abel understood that meaning perfectly now. The memory hit her so hard that tears suddenly formed in her eyes. Across the table, Geoma was completely lost. All he had done was ask her to cut his food because of his blessing. Seeing her tear up made him wonder what the hell he had done wrong. After gathering herself, Abel apologized and quietly took the plate. A few moments later, she handed it back with every piece perfectly cut. They ate in silence for a while before Abel finally broke it. She asked why he wasn't curious about why she had started crying. Geoma honestly didn't want to pry into something personal, so he stayed quiet. Abel sighed before asking why he acted differently around her compared to everyone else. She already knew he was the academy's top student. Then, with a weak smile that didn't reach her eyes, she admitted what had really been bothering her all this time. Looking directly at him, she quietly asked if he truly had no interest in her. Geoma completely froze. Meanwhile, somewhere far away, Ryozo was suffering. She had set alarms, searched endlessly, and spent days trying to figure out where Jioma had gone. According to the media, he was supposedly in America. Unfortunately, that was all the information she had. For days, she wandered around the academy alone. Even during archery practice, her mind remained somewhere else entirely. She drew her bow, fired, and hit the bullseye perfectly. She had missed several shots before because Jioma kept occupying her thoughts. Eventually, the scene shifted to an airport in the United States. A private jet touched down, and Ryozo stepped out wearing a full American-style outfit. In one hand, she carried her young gang, while the other held her passport. The destination stamp clearly showed Los Angeles. Looking ahead with smug determination, she confidently declared that Jioma just needed to wait for her. The scene shifted back to Abel's memories. She remembered the day Siegfried had formally handed her the sword that symbolized her position as the successor of the Sword Saint family. The moment she accepted it, applause erupted around her. Everyone congratulated her and spoke about her future. They said she would surpass her father one day. They told her never to stumble, never to fail, and never to stop becoming stronger. From that day onward, she wasn't simply Abel anymore. She was the Sword of Nibelung. Standing there as a child, she had stared silently at the sword in her hands, feeling the immense weight of responsibility attached to it. Later, during Avalon Island, when Jioma handed her the grilled rabbit meat he had prepared, she had unconsciously been reminded of that moment. Something about the way he offered it had overlapped with those old memories. Then she remembered how he casually warned her not to leave her ankle untreated, or it might get infected. After that, he had simply told her to eat while the food was still warm, because it tasted best that way. There had been no expectations behind his words, no pressure, no burden. Looking back now, Abel realized that Jioma was the first person who hadn't looked at her. And before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Up High grow naturally. See Nibelung. Everyone else saw the heir to the Sword Saint family. Jioma had simply seen Abel. Back in the present, her quiet question about whether he was interested in her left Jioma's wedding bullets. The sudden turn in the conversation completely caught him off guard. Before he could formulate an answer, Abel continued speaking. She'd admitted that at first she thought Jioma had hidden his position as the top student for some deeper reason. However, the more she observed him, the more she felt she had misunderstood everything. In the end, she concluded that he simply hadn't wanted to deal with her. Jioma remained silent while she kept going. Abel bitterly asked whether he thought everyone in the world was a genius like him. She pointed out that ordinary people existed too, people who had to rely on others and struggle their way forward. However, before she could continue further, Jioma abruptly called her name. The firmness in his voice immediately stopped her. Looking directly at her, Jioma pointed out that everything she was saying stemmed from insecurity. Abel froze at the accusation. Before she could argue, Jioma continued. He told her that she kept insisting he was different. But those words actually looked down on him more than anyone else ever had. Did she truly know how he lived? Did she know how much effort he had put in to stand where he was now? The question struck Abel speechless because she didn't know any of it. She didn't know about the years he had spent mastering knives before arriving in this world. She sacrifices hidden behind the results everyone admired. To her, he simply looked talented. Jioma calmly explained that she was reducing both his efforts and her own efforts to a single convenient word, talent. As he spoke, Jioma found himself reflecting on his own past. People had always called him a genius with knives, but nobody ever cared about the process behind that reputation. They saw the finished product, not the bruised hands gripping blades until they bled. They never saw the endless training or the mountain of failures stacked behind every success. The same was true. Even now, everyone looked at the blessing of the sword god and called it talent. Yet nobody understood the cost attached to that power. Every bit of strength demanded something in return. And unlike everyone else, Jioma knew better than anyone that the future was no longer predictable. The original story had already been twisted beyond recognition. He had no idea what awaited him tomorrow. The only certainty left was that he needed to survive. No matter what, the tension gradually faded from Abel's face. Realizing the truth behind his words, she quietly apologized. Jioma decided not to dwell on the argument any longer and simply suggested that they continue eating. The two returned to their meal, but the atmosphere had completely changed. While eating, Geoma couldn't help thinking that something as simple as avoiding the activation of his blessing had somehow led them into this deeply personal conversation. The timing for the favor he wanted to ask her about the dungeon had completely vanished. More importantly, he felt strangely hesitant about saying anything further. Maybe it was the part of him that constantly forced him to think rationally. But even offering words of comfort felt risky, so he stayed quiet, focused on his food. The silence between them didn't last long. After gathering her courage, Abel finally spoke about something she rarely discussed. Hesitantly, she revealed that her parents had gone missing inside a dungeon. Today marked exactly 10 years since their disappearance. She admitted that she had been looking forward to this academy break for a very long time, because students weren't allowed to freely enter dungeons before enrollment. This vacation was the first real opportunity she had to pursue the truth herself. Geoma listened quietly as she explained the situation. At first glance, it sounded like the kind of incident that would occur in an extremely dangerous dungeon. However, Abel revealed something even stranger. The dungeon wasn't high-ranked at all. In fact, it was considered relatively low-level. Even now, after all these years, she couldn't understand how her parents had vanished without leaving a trace inside a place that shouldn't have been capable of swallowing heroes of their caliber. Hearing that, our MC was reminded of the original Kang Geoma's parents, who had also disappeared without a trace. The memories were vague and distant. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't even properly recall their faces anymore. After a brief silence, Geoma simply told her they should go together. He explained that he already planned to spend his vacation clearing dungeons anyway, so helping her investigate wouldn't be a problem. Abel immediately became emotional and tried to refuse. She insisted that this was her personal burden, and that she couldn't drag someone else into it. Geoma calmly countered that she was already letting him stay at Castle Sigurd, so she could consider this his way of gradually repaying that favor. Hearing that, Abel's eyes filled with tears and she thanked him sincerely. Meanwhile, Geoma remained outwardly calm. Internally, however, he couldn't help reflecting on himself. It wasn't that he wasn't worried about Abel. He genuinely wanted to help her, yet he also knew that his decision had been reached through cold logic. Helping Abel would benefit him tremendously as well. The higher his synchronization rate climbed, the more mechanical and detached his thinking became. No matter the situation, his emotions eventually cooled down and logic took control. Sometimes he wondered what kind of person he would become if that process continued indefinitely. Pushing those thoughts aside, he asked where the dungeon was located. Abel revealed that it was the undead dungeon, the very place where her parents had disappeared 10 years ago. Later that day, the scene shifted to the car ride back toward the castle. Shyle was behind the wheel, while Abel slept peacefully in the back seat. The moment Geoma settled into his seat, Shyle unexpectedly thanked him. Confused, he asked what she meant. The maid explained that it had been a very long time since she had seen Abel sleep so peacefully. Hearing that, Geoma glanced over his shoulder. Sure enough, Abel was asleep with a small smile on her face. Shyle remarked that Miss Abel seemed genuinely happy today. Geoma found himself wondering whether Abel used to smile like that before life burdened her with so many responsibilities. Looking forward again, he quietly agreed with Shile's observation. The maid then asked whether he had heard the details about the undead dungeon. That question reminded him of their earlier discussion. Back at the restaurant, Abel had thoroughly researched everything. She had shown him information on her phone and explained that the dungeon was located near the border between Switzerland and France. Because it wasn't particularly popular, maintenance was minimal. However, international hero regulations still required at least 3 registered participants before entry was allowed. Geoma remembered being impressed by how prepared she was. She knew far more about the dungeon than he did, which meant the investigation would likely proceed smoother than expected. During that conversation, Abel had moved closer to show him information on her phone, only for both of them to suddenly realize how close their faces had become. Embarrassed, Abel had quickly pulled away, while Geoma awkwardly tried to break the tension by complimenting her preparation. That same conversation had also revealed the identity of their third party. When Geoma asked who would accompany them, Abel casually mentioned that a senior hero and former Jokwon Academy student would be joining them. Back in the present, Geoma now understood that she had been referring to Shyle. Looking at the maid, it was obvious she wasn't an ordinary servant. Hero rankings were determined by points. The overwhelming majority of heroes fell into the junior category. Senior heroes, meanwhile, possessed over 8,000 points and represented only a small fraction of the population. Shile belonged to that elite group. In other words, the seemingly harmless maid was actually among the top 10% of active heroes. Mentioning that he had heard she would accompany them, Geomac commented on it. Shile modestly replied that she would do her best not to become a burden. Hearing that, Geoma almost laughed. How could someone with senior hero qualifications possibly be considered a burden? Shile then began explaining her connection to the Nibelung family. She revealed that she had graduated from Jokwon Academy thanks entirely to Abel's parents. 10 years ago, before joining the family, she had been an orphan with no future prospects. While countless others remained trapped in that situation, she had been fortunate enough to catch the attention of the Nibelung family. They had recognized her potential, sponsored her education, and ultimately gave her a path forward in life. Even now, she remained deeply grateful for everything they had done for her. Geomac commented that her talent must have been exceptional if they had. Before we move ahead, please take a second to share on this video. Sharing helps this video reach friends who may also enjoy anime, gaming, travel, cricket, chess, career basics, or personal stories. Your support helps Amazing Apai grow naturally. Chosen her. However, Shile simply shook her head and said that compared to him, she was just an ordinary person. Then she admitted that accompanying them had actually been her own request. She wanted to help search for the people who had completely changed her life. After a brief hesitation, she revealed that she was also one of the commoner students who attended the academy. That revelation immediately caught Geoma's attention. Shile smiled and admitted that she had been quite satisfied. Reading the recent articles about his actions as a commoner student, that was one of the reasons she liked him. Geoma awkwardly looked away after hearing such a straightforward compliment. Unfortunately for him, Shile wasn't done. With a teasing smile, she pointed out that despite everything, he really should have worn better clothes for today's outing. Miss Abel had clearly been upset about that. Faced with that observation, Geoma couldn't even come up with a proper response. Once again, he found himself completely outmatched by the women around him. Once they returned to the castle, Geoma received word that Siegfried wanted to see him. Without wasting time, he headed toward the Sword Emperor's office. After knocking on the door and receiving permission to enter, he cautiously stepped inside and asked why he had been summoned. Siegfried was standing near his desk with an unusually serious expression. The atmosphere immediately made Geoma feel like something important was about to happen. The old man instructed him to take a seat, saying there were a few matters they needed to discuss. However, before addressing any of them, Siegfried suddenly went straight for a completely different topic. He asked Geoma what exactly he had done with Abel yesterday. The question caught Geoma completely off guard. Confused, he answered honestly that they had simply gone out for lunch together. Siegfried asked again if that was really all that happened. Geoma confirmed it once more. The moment he did, Siegfried set his teacup down and burst into laughter. He loudly declared that it was a relief and that there was nothing strange about friends having lunch together. Still chuckling, he added that he would appreciate being informed beforehand if something like that happened again. Geoma could only stare at him, internally frustrated by the old man's bizarre priorities. Still laughing, Siegfried admitted that he had nearly forgotten the actual reason for calling him. Geoma's annoyance only grew. Then Siegfried's expression became serious. He'd explained that he wasn't entirely certain yet, but there was something that could potentially become a problem. Curious, Geoma asked what he meant. In response, Siegfried handed him a document and told him to examine it carefully. Looking through the contents, Geoma found nothing unusual at first glance. The document listed his date of birth, July 7th, his enrollment in the Wolf class at Jokwon Academy, and a few other basic details. To him, it all looked completely normal. However, Siegfried asked whether anything felt strange. Geoma shook his head and replied that it simply appeared to be standard information. The Sword Emperor immediately criticized him for lacking attention to detail and pointed toward the bottom of the document. There, a section indicated that Geoma's hero points were currently being calculated. That was the anomaly. Siegfried explained that academy students were never supposed to have their hero points officially calculated. That had long been an agreement between the Hero Association and the Academy. Students were meant to focus on studying and developing their abilities. Their evaluations happened internally within the Academy system, rather than through official hero rankings. Yet Geoma's hero points were now being processed anyway. When Geoma asked whether that was illegal, Siegfried clarified that it wasn't against any law. The issue was that it was unprecedented. It meant the association no longer viewed him as merely a student. In all likelihood, this was the work of the association president and vice president, Richard Demerit. Hearing those names made Geoma pause. The association's highest-ranking figures were paying attention to him personally. The realization was unsettling. He wondered if his recent actions, the Academy Festival, the incidents involving Mayorang, and even the attention he had received overseas were responsible for attracting such scrutiny. Seeing Geoma's concern, Siegfried waved it off and told him not to overthink the situation. While it was suspicious, he believed the most likely cause was Geoma's performance against Mayorang during the festival. The old man jokingly remarked that perhaps he should have gone easier on her. Geoma apologized out of habit, but Siegfried simply laughed. There was no need to apologize, he said. If a problem arose, then they would solve it when the time came. After all, he was Geoma's guardian now. Hearing that word unexpectedly stirred old memories within Geoma. It reminded him of his first master, and the protection he had once received in another life. For a brief moment, he found himself strangely comforted by the thought. The conversation then shifted toward the undead dungeon. Siegfried mentioned that Charon had informed him about Geoma's plans to accompany Abel and Schill. Just as he was about to continue, a knock sounded from the door. A moment later, Abel entered the room, apologizing for interrupting. Geoma looked at her in confusion, wondering why she had come. Abel explained that there was something she needed to confirm with him before their departure. The instant she mentioned that, Siegfried's expression darkened. The pressure in the room noticeably increased, making Geoma feel uneasy. After a long sigh, the Sword Emperor finally gave up and addressed Geoma directly. He told him that he was entrusting Abel to him. The moment those words left his mouth, Abel visibly brightened. Geoma simply nodded and agreed. As the two left the office together, Siegfried remained seated behind his desk. The scene then shifted to Los Angeles. Ryozo was wandering through the streets while staring down at her phone, growing increasingly annoyed because the people she had called to help her were running late as usual. While searching around, she spotted a group of thugs hanging around a street corner. Without hesitation, she walked up to them, pulled out her phone, and showed them a picture of Geoma. She asked if any of them recognized the man in the photo. The gangsters exchanged confused looks before shaking their heads. None of them had ever seen him before. Hearing that, Ryozo let out a disappointed sigh and muttered that maybe the Sashimi sword saint wasn't nearly as famous as she had assumed. If nobody recognized him, finding him in a country this large was going to be much harder than expected. As she turned to leave, the gangster's attention shifted from the photo to her. One fat wannabe gangster called out to her, claiming that he might recognize the person in the photo if he could take a closer look. Ryozo immediately sensed the way they were staring at her and wanted nothing to do with it. She declined and continued walking away. Unfortunately, the man suddenly grabbed her wrist and told her that she should listen when people were trying to be nice. His tone quickly turned threatening, and as he raised his hand to strike her, someone else caught his arm before he could do anything. The gangster froze. Standing behind was Rachel, gripping his arm tightly while glaring at him with cold eyes. She calmly asked him whether he wanted to die. Behind her stood Speed Weapon, who was already on the phone reporting the situation to the police. The wannabe gang immediately scattered before they get fucked. Ryozo looked at her two friends and complained that they were late. Rachel greeted her happily, saying it was nice to see her again, while Speed Weapon checked if she was alright after running into trouble immediately upon arriving in America. A short while later, the three were sitting together inside a Burger King. Rachel looked excited about the whole situation, saying it sounded like a lot of fun. Speed Weapon, however, was more confused than excited. He mentioned seeing the recent news articles and asked Ryozo why she had come all the way to the United States during break. Whatever she was trying to do had to be important if she was willing to travel across the world for it. Ryozo awkwardly admitted that it was something like that and asked them to help her. Speed Weapon said it wasn't exactly an impossible request, But before he could finish, Rachel interrupted him, saying the quest will be fun. She then excitedly asked where they were going. Ryoso admitted she didn't know Gyoma's exact location since they lacked a destination. They would simply have to follow the clues available to them. The only lead she had was the Lancelot Company, a hero management agency based in New York. Long afterward, Speed Weapon proudly led them to his beloved car. With a huge grin, he loudly introduced it as the legendary Speedwagon. Ryoso admitted that it looked pretty cool, while Rachel greeted it like an old friend and called it the angel of the underworld. After everyone got inside, Rachel entered the destination, while Speed Weapon took the driver's seat, sitting comfortably in the back. Ryoso officially declared that the quest to find Gyoma had begun. Unfortunately, the grand adventure lasted only until they reached a deserted stretch of road, where the car suddenly broke down. The vehicle rolled to a stop, leaving them stranded in the middle of nowhere. Soon, Speed Weapon managed to get the car running again, and the trio resumed their journey. As the road stretched endlessly ahead of them, Speed Weapon asked Ryoso what exactly she needed to deliver to the club president. Ryoso immediately replied that she couldn't tell him, but Rachel seemed to understand what was going through her mind. A wide grin spread across Rachel's face, though she kept her thoughts to herself. Several hours later, they stopped at a gas station to refuel. While Speed Weapon filled the tank, Rachel asked how much farther they needed to go. Speed Weapon estimated that it would take roughly 3 days if they kept rotating drivers without stopping too often. Hearing that, Ryoso admitted that New York really was farther away than she had imagined. Rachel immediately volunteered to take over the driving shift next. Before long, the three of them were back on the road again, pushing forward through the night while taking turns behind the wheel. As the hours passed, Speed Weapon eventually fell asleep in the backseat, while Ryoso remained focused on her phone. At one point, Rachel called out to her and asked what she planned to do if Gyoma wasn't in New York either. Rachel pointed out that it wasn't like Ryoso to act without. Before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Up High grow naturally. Certainty. Looking down at her screen, Ryoso saw the message she had sent earlier, asking Gyoma if he was awake. There was still no reply. Rachel then asked her directly if she really loved him that much. Without hesitation or embarrassment, Ryoso answered yes. The blunt honesty caught Rachel completely off guard, laughing loudly. She asked why. Ryoso quietly admitted that she wasn't entirely sure herself. Rachel continued teasing her and asked whether she had tried contacting to Abel. Confused, Ryoso asked what she was supposed to say. Rachel simply giggled and told her to figure it out herself. The trio spent the rest of the journey talking, joking around, singing along to music, and sharing laughs as they crossed vast deserts, endless highways, glowing cities, orange sunsets, and countless nights illuminated by distant lights. Despite the long trip, the road somehow felt shorter because of the company. Eventually, exhaustion caught up to them. Ryoso ended up sleeping with her strange eye-patch sleep mask covering her face while the car continued rolling forward through the darkness. Sometime later, Rachel reached over and nudged her awake. Ryoso lifted the mask and muttered that she was listening. However, the moment she looked through the window, her eyes widened. Towering skyscrapers filled the horizon, covered in gigantic illuminated advertisements and digital billboards that painted the city in countless colors. The streets below buzzed with life even at night, and bright lights stretched as far as the eye could see. Seeing her reaction, Rachel smiled and dramatically spread her arms before announcing that they had finally arrived in New York. The scene then shifts to Siegfried. Inside his residence, Karen was serving tea to the Sword Emperor as usual, but the concern on his face was obvious. After placing the cup down, he asked whether Siegfried was truly all right. Siegfried let out a small sigh and replied that there was no way he could be all right. Hearing this, Karen carefully brought up the matter that had been bothering him. He wondered why Siegfried had not stopped Abel from going. After all, the place she had entered was an undead dungeon. Not only was it extremely dangerous, but the experience itself could be traumatizing for a young lady. In Sharon's opinion, it would have been better if the Sword Emperor had accompanied them personally. As soon as he finished speaking, Sharon realized he had let his emotions speak for him. When Siegfried called his name, he immediately lowered his head and apologized, admitting that his concern for Abel had gotten the better of him. However, Siegfried did not seem upset. Taking a sip of tea, He calmly explained that while he understood Sharon's worries, they had to respect Abel's decision. She was no longer a child who needed to be protected from every difficulty. The wounds from her past could not be avoided forever, while he could support her when necessary. Constantly standing in her way would only delay her growth. Some obstacles were things she needed to overcome herself. Siegfried then mentioned another reason he was not worried. Kang Jeoma was accompanying her. Siegfried stated that no matter what enemy appeared inside the dungeon, it would not be enough to threaten them. Karen found himself surprised by the amount of trust the Sword Emperor had placed in the young boy. To most people, Kang Jeoma was already considered a once-in-a-century genius, but Siegfried believed that title alone was far too small to describe him. In his opinion, Kang Jeoma possessed potential that went beyond what most people could even imagine. Hearing those words, Karen fell into thought. Siegfried was known for his ability to judge people accurately, and he rarely gave such high praise to anyone. If a person had earned the Sword Emperor's acknowledgement, then they were undoubtedly extraordinary. Understanding this, Karen's worries gradually eased. He finally bowed and said that he'd understood Siegfried's reasoning. If Kang Jeoma was with Abel, then there was little need to worry about her safety. With the matter settled, Sharon poured another cup of tea and returned to his usual calm demeanor. He politely told Siegfried that if he needed anything else, he only had to ask. Taking the cup from him, Siegfried smiled slightly and remarked that Sharon truly knew him better than anyone else. Meanwhile, later that night, Kang Jeoma sat alone while examining his system window. A new notification had appeared before him, revealing that the assimilation rate restriction at 25% had finally been lifted. The system also stated that as his assimilation rate continued to rise, he might acquire memories related to some unknown existence. On top of that, additional rewards could be granted whenever he obtained a fragment. However, the details remained hidden behind question marks. At the moment, he had collected 0 out of the 7 fragments. While his assimilation rate had reached 29.1%, the next restriction would be removed once he reached 35%. The information only left Jeoma more confused. Memory fragments, hidden rewards, and an unknown source behind the system's guidance all sounded suspicious. It felt as though the system had begun throwing quests at him on its own, without providing any proper explanation. Staring at the question marks, he wondered whether the system was connected to the will of some powerful entity, or perhaps even a living being. The 7 fragments might also hold clues related to the sword god's blessing. Whatever the truth was, he knew he lacked enough information to draw any conclusions. For now, the only thing he could do was continue moving forward and gather more fragments. His thoughts soon shifted to the undead dungeon they would be raiding. If everything went well, his assimilation rate would likely increase there as well. However, the biggest obstacle was the Lich King Draugr. Ordinary undead were troublesome enough, since they continued rising again after being defeated, and their numbers only increased as time passed. For someone like Jeoma, whose fighting style relied on quick and decisive attacks, it was one of the worst possible matchups. They only needed to hold out for 50 seconds, and Abel and Shyle should be capable of buying him that much time. Even so, Draugr was an S-class monster. Depending on the situation, it could be every bit as dangerous as a Gore. He could not afford to underestimate it for even a moment. As he considered possible solutions, Jeoma's thoughts drifted toward the mysterious power he had used before. If he could access that strength again, defeating Draugr might become possible. The problem was that he understood almost nothing about it. Ever since that day, he had felt as if a part of his humanity was slowly being stripped away. The feeling lingered in the back of his mind, making him reluctant to rely on that power unless absolutely necessary. More importantly, Abel had her own reason for entering the dungeon. For 10 years she had searched for traces of her parents. It was a wish she had carried with her for most of her life, and Jeoma refused to let that wish become tainted because of his own problems. At that moment, Abel's voice suddenly pulled him out of his thoughts. She had been practicing nearby and asked for his opinion on her form. She felt as though she was still putting too much tension into her shoulders during her swings. However, as soon as she finished speaking, she realized Jeoma had not heard a single word. His mind had been somewhere else entirely. Slightly annoyed, she pointed out that he had promised to watch over her training. Jeoma could only admit that he honestly did not know what to say. Abel clicked her tongue before returning to her practice, raising her sword once again. She continued repeating the same movements. She stated that she could not afford to become dead weight for the people accompanying her, especially Jioma. Watching her train, Jioma quietly reflected on her determination. While he did not know much about swordsmanship itself, he understood what it meant to repeat the same action over and over in pursuit of improvement. It reminded him of his former self, someone just as stubborn and relentless. He knew Abel had not come this far through talent alone. Behind her skill was countless hours of effort and persistence. With that in mind, Jioma remained where he was and continued watching, as Abel practiced throughout the night, refining her swordsmanship swing after swing without slowing down. The following morning, preparations for the dungeon raid were finally complete. Standing outside, before their departure, Abel informed her grandfather that she was leaving. Siegfried listened quietly and gave a simple nod. Watching the exchange from nearby, Jioma found himself slightly surprised. The Sword Emperor appeared far calmer than he had expected. Considering that Abel was about to enter an A-class undead dungeon, Jioma had assumed he would be showing at least some visible concern. Instead, he looked completely composed. As Jioma was thinking about it, Shile stepped closer and quietly commented that the Sword Emperor was probably far more anxious than any of them. He simply wasn't showing it. Jioma was not entirely convinced, but before he could think further about it, Siegfried suddenly called out to him. Jioma immediately shifted his attention toward the Sword Emperor. Looking directly at him, Siegfried stated that he was placing his faith in him. The weight behind those words was impossible to miss. Jioma simply answered with a firm confirmation. With that brief exchange over, the group entered the vehicle and began their journey toward the mountains where the dungeon was located. After seeing them off, Siegfried turned around and prepared to leave as well. Sharon followed behind him, but could not help voicing his concern. He wondered if their next destination was a little too sudden. According to him, showing up at the association without prior notice would likely cause quite a bit of trouble. However, Siegfried appeared completely unconcerned. He explained that the Spirisane's actions were practically an invitation directed at him. Since the association had decided to involve itself, it was only natural for him to respond in person. Sharon pointed out that visiting at such a time would be rather inconvenient for those on the receiving end. Siegfried simply explained his reasoning. The association had already begun investigating Kang Jioma. As Jioma's guardian, he felt it was necessary to make his position clear. There were certain burdens that should not be placed on the shoulders of young people. If obstacles appeared in their path, it was the responsibility of adults to remove them. Abel, Jioma, and the others were still young. There was only so much they could handle on their own. Hearing that, Charon immediately understood and nodded in agreement. Siegfried then reassured him that there was nothing to worry about. After all, the two of them would be going together. Surely there would be no need for arguments if they handled things personally. Sharon could only give a helpless smile in response. He reminded Siegfried that it had already been more than 20 years since he had left the front lines behind. Hearing that, Siegfried looked at him and laughed lightly. He reminded Sharon that he was once the hero who had attained the rank of warrior at the remarkably young age of 25. Then, with a rare grin, Siegfried stated that he would be relying on him again after all these years. For the first time in a long while, he addressed Sharon not as his butler, but by the name that had once been known throughout the battlefield, Raksasa Charon. Meanwhile, Geomat, Abel, and Schild traveled in a limousine that steadily made its way through the mountain roads. The atmosphere inside was relatively quiet. Throughout the trip, Schild took the opportunity to guide the two younger students. She shared information about the region, the dungeon, and various debt. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to Amazing Apai. Subscribing makes sure you do not miss the next video, and it gives me motivation to keep improving the quality of every upload. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next one.